In a peaceful village surrounded by lush green hills, there lived a woman named Kim. She was known for her wealth, beauty, and generous nature. Her husband, Ade, was equally respected, though for different reasons. Ade was a hard-working and disciplined man who believed that responsibility and humility were the foundation of a good life. Together, they had a son, Toby, their only child, and the apple of their eyes. Toby was a cheerful and intelligent boy, but as he grew, it became clear that he was far more pampered by his mother than was good for him. From a young age, Toby never lacked anything, and Kim ensured he had the best toys, clothes, and food. If Toby wanted something, Kim would make it happen, no matter how unreasonable the request. Even when Ade expressed concern that such indulgence might spoil their son, Kim dismissed him, saying, "He's just a child. Let him enjoy life. Don't be so strict." Ade would sigh, knowing it wasn't a battle he could win easily. Toby's behavior soon began to show the effects of his mother's coddling. If he threw tantrums, Kim would quickly give in to calm him down. If he took something that didn't belong to him, she would laugh and say, "He's just a curious boy." When Toby broke things or misbehaved, Ade would try to correct him, but Kim always intervened. "Stop being so hard on him," she would say. "You're going to scare him." As Toby grew older, Ade's warnings became more urgent. He saw the boys developing stubbornness and entitlement, but Kim remained firm in her belief that love meant shielding Toby from consequences. Discipline can wait, she often said, brushing off her husband's concerns. "He's my son, and I know what's best for him." This dynamic frustrated Ade, but he loved his wife and wanted peace in their home. So he relented, stepping back and hoping Toby would grow out of his behavior naturally. Unfortunately, the seeds of indulgence had already been sown. By the time Toby turned 13, the consequences of Kim's parenting became evident. At school, Toby was unruly and defiant, often causing trouble in class. Teachers tried to discipline him, but he was quick to threaten, "I'll tell my mother." And true to his word, whenever he got into trouble, Toby would call Kim in tears, spinning tales of unfair treatment. Kim, fueled by her unwavering belief in her son's innocence, would storm into the school the next day, shouting at teachers and defending Toby's actions. "Why are you always picking on my son?" she would demand, her voice echoing through the school corridors. "Do you know how much money I've donated to this school? If you can't treat him with respect, maybe I'll take him somewhere better." The teachers, caught between Toby's behavior and Kim's wrath, often gave up trying to discipline him. At home, the situation was no better. One evening, Ade found Toby shoving their young housemaid, Amina, while she was trying to finish her chores. When Ade confronted him, Toby shrugged and walked away as if his father's words meant nothing. Furious, Ade followed him and said firmly, "Don't you ever touch her like that again. Do you hear me?" Toby turned and gave his father a look that chilled him. "Why do you care?" the boy replied, his voice dripping with insolence. Before Ade could say another word, Kim appeared in the doorway. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking at the tension between father and son. When Ade explained what had happened, Kim scoffed. "You're always overreacting," she said, pulling Toby behind her. "He's just playing around. Why do you always want to make him feel bad?" "Kim," Ade said, his voice steady but tired, "this isn't about me or you. It's about teaching him what's right." But Kim wasn't listening. Instead, she turned to Toby and said softly, "Don't worry about your father. He doesn't understand you like I do." That night, Ade lay awake, troubled by the path his family was taking. He loved his son deeply, but the boy was slipping further into disrespect and entitlement. Whenever he tried to set things right, Kim's constant interference rendered his efforts useless. Over time, Ade began to retreat emotionally. If she won't listen, what's the point? He thought to himself. He resolved to let Kim handle Toby as she pleased, though his heart ached at the thought of what the future might hold. But the situation only grew worse. Toby's misbehavior escalated, and his mother's blind defense of him emboldened the boy even further. Ade watched helplessly as the son he loved became a stranger, a boy who no longer respected him, or anyone else for that matter. By the time Toby was a teenager, he had become a menace not only at home, but also in school and the community. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world revolved around him, a belief nurtured by years of indulgence from his mother. Teachers were wary of him. His classmates avoided him. He bullied those who dared to stand up to him and treated school rules as a joke. The few who tried to correct him often found themselves facing Kim's fury. One incident at school stood out. Toby had been caught vandalizing the principal's car with a group of friends. When confronted, Toby smirked and said, "My mother will pay for it. It's just a car." The school administration had had enough and decided to expel him. However, before the letter could even be handed to Kim, she arrived at the school gates in her expensive car, her temper blazing. "What nonsense is this?" she yelled at the principal. "My son is not going anywhere. You think you can ruin his future over some trivial nonsense? Do you know who I am?" The principal, a calm and patient man, explained the gravity of Toby's actions, but Kim wouldn't hear it. "If this is about money, I'll pay for the damages," she snapped. "And if this is about punishing my son, you should be ashamed of yourselves. He's a child." The school eventually backed down, not because they agreed with Kim, but because her donations kept them afloat. Toby, meanwhile, learned nothing. He strutted through the hallways the next day, as if he were untouchable. His mother's unwavering defense only made him bolder, and his misdeeds escalated. At home, things took a darker turn. Without Aid's influence, Toby acted as though the house was his kingdom. He barked orders at the staff and treated the housemaid, Amina, with disrespect. On one occasion, when Amina tried to avoid his inappropriate advances, he grabbed her wrist and said, "You work here because of my mother. Don't forget that." Amina reported the incident to Kim, hoping for protection, but Kim brushed it off. "Toby is just playing around," she said dismissively. "He doesn't mean any harm." Ade, though divorced and living apart, still heard whispers of his son's behavior. It pained him to see his warnings come true, but there was little he could do now. Kim's blind love had created a boy who believed there were no limits, no consequences. It was during this time that Toby's thoughts began to drift into deeply troubling territory. The excessive praise and affection from his mother, combined with his lack of boundaries, warped his sense of right and wrong. He began to see Kim in ways no son should ever see his mother. At first, the thoughts made him uncomfortable, but as they lingered, he convinced himself there was nothing wrong with them. After all, hadn't his mother always given him everything he wanted? Wouldn't she understand this too? One evening, Kim came home from work exhausted after a long day. Toby greeted her at the door with his usual charm. "Let me bring you some water, Mama," he said with a wide smile. She smiled back, grateful for his kindness, unaware of the darkness behind his gesture. Toby had laced the water with a drug he had stolen from the family's medical supplies. Kim drank the water without suspicion and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep. Toby crept into her room under the cover of darkness and had sex with her. When Kim woke the next morning, she felt groggy and disoriented. Something felt off, but she brushed it aside. "Maybe I'm just overworked," she thought aloud. She mentioned her fatigue to Toby later that day, and he quickly responded, "You've been working too hard, Mama. You need to rest more." His tone was so innocent, so sincere, that Kim didn't think to question him further. Encouraged by how easily he had gotten away with it, Toby repeated the act several times. Kim occasionally woke up feeling strange, even suspecting she had been drugged. But she quickly dismissed the idea. "Toby is such a sweet boy," she told herself. "He would never do anything to harm me." Toby's confidence grew with each success. To him, his mother's trust and love were proof that she wouldn't stop him if she ever found out. But his arrogance would soon lead to his undoing. One evening, Toby prepared the drugged water as usual. However, when Kim took the glass to her room, she accidentally spilled it. Thinking nothing of it, she poured herself a fresh glass of plain water and drank it instead. Toby, unaware of the mishap, went about his twisted plan. That night, as Toby crept into his mother's room, Kim stirred and woke. At first, she was disoriented, confused by the sight of her son standing over her. Then, as the realization of what was happening dawned on her, she froze in horror. "Toby," she gasped, pulling the blanket tightly around her. "What are you doing?" Toby hesitated, then shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Mama, don't act surprised. This isn't the first time." Kim's stomach churned. "What do you mean? How long has this been going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling with shock and anger. Toby smirked. "Since the first time I gave you the water. You know, the one that made you sleep so well." Kim felt sick. Her own son, the boy she had loved and defended, had been violating her trust in the most unimaginable way. "Get out of this room," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Now!" But Toby didn't move. Instead, he glared at her. "I'm not done," he said coldly. "Why are you acting like this? You're mine. Do you hear me? Mine. Mama." In that moment, Kim saw the monster she had created. Gathering every ounce of strength, She pushed Toby away and ran out of the room, her heart pounding. For the first time in years, she felt fear, not of the world outside, but of her own child. And Kim bolted from the house, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she fled into the night, wearing nothing but her nightgown. Her heart raced with a mix of fear, disgust, and a dawning realization that she had created the monster now chasing her. The usually quiet streets of the village felt alive with shadows, but Kim didn't stop until she reached the police station. When she burst through the doors, disheveled and trembling, the officers on duty were startled. "What's wrong, madam?" one of them asked, his tone urgent. "It's my son," and Kim stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He's not right. He tried to harm me. You have to arrest him." The officers exchanged worried glances, but didn't hesitate. They quickly gathered their gear and drove to Kim's house. What they found there sent a chill through even the most hardened among them. Toby was sitting on the front porch, a knife clutched in his hand, his eyes wild with anger and confusion. "Where is she?" he demanded as the officers approached. "Bring her back." The lead officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Toby put the knife down. "Let's talk." Toby laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made the officers tense. "You think you can stop me? She's mine. She belongs to me." The officers surrounded him carefully, their movements slow and deliberate. One officer distracted Toby by talking to him, while another approached from behind and swiftly disarmed him. Toby screamed in rage, fighting wildly as they subdued him and placed him in handcuffs. The officers managed to restrain him without injury, but it was clear to all present that the boy had lost touch with reality. When Toby was taken away, Kim stood in the station, still shaking. She could barely process what had just happened. Her son, the boy she had nurtured and adored, had become something unrecognizable. She thought back to all the moments she had defended him, shielded him, and ignored the warning signs. Each memory felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Later that night, Kim sat alone in her small cell-like station room, unable to sleep. For the first time, she allowed herself to see the truth. Her love had not saved Toby. Instead, it had enabled him to grow into someone who could destroy her, and himself. Toby's arrest shocked the entire village. Whispers spread quickly about the boy who had once been so adored and the mother who had always defended him. At the police station, officers interviewed both Kim and Toby. The boy showed no remorse, openly admitting to everything he had done as if it were his right. His boldness and lack of guilt only deepened the officer's unease. When asked why he had done it, Toby's response was chilling. "She gave me everything I wanted," he said simply. "Why should this be any different?" The statement broke Kim's heart. She realized that she had taught Toby to believe there were no boundaries, no consequences. In her mind, she had been protecting him, but in reality, she had failed him and herself. Toby was sent to a juvenile detention center while awaiting trial. The court-appointed psychologist described him as a danger to others, recommending that he remain under close supervision. Kim attended the hearings in silence, her face pale and drawn. She had no words to defend him this time. For once, she knew there was nothing she could say. In the weeks that followed, Kim's life became a shell of what it had been. She could no longer walk through the village without feeling the weight of judgmental stares. Neighbors whispered behind her back, their voices carrying phrases like "too soft" and "too blind." But Kim didn't care about the gossip. Her pain ran deeper than anyone could imagine. Every night, she replayed the events in her mind, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when she had failed her son. Was it the first time she excused his tantrum? The first time she dismissed AIDS warnings? Or was it every single time she chose to see Toby as her perfect angel, ignoring the reality of his flaws? She eventually sought counseling, determined to understand how her actions had contributed to the tragedy. Through this process, Kim began to heal, but the scars remained. She started speaking to other parents in the community, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "Love your children," she would tell them, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "But don't love them blindly. Teach them discipline. Teach them respect. Teach them that actions have consequences." As for Toby, his path took a darker turn. His years in the juvenile facility were marked by continued defiance and aggression. When he eventually aged out of the system, he was transferred to an adult prison, his life defined by the choices he had made and the upbringing that had shaped him. Kim's story became a lesson that echoed throughout the village and beyond. It was a story of love gone wrong, of the dangers of indulgence, and of the price paid when discipline and accountability are absent. Though Kim carried the weight of her mistakes for the rest of her life, she dedicated herself to helping others avoid the same fate. In the end, the tale of Kim and Toby served as a stark reminder. Love without boundaries can destroy as much as it builds.